Emily Hart pressed her back against the cold marble wall, heart hammering in her chest as she fumbled with the buttons of her silk blouse. She had only wanted to change quickly. It was late, the office was empty, and she had a big presentation the next day. She thought no one was around. She thought she was safe. The glass windows behind her stretched floor to ceiling, giving a perfect view of the New York skyline, glittering like spilled diamonds in the night. She had been standing there, adjusting the borrowed blazer from her boss, hoping it would give her a more professional edge when the disaster happened. The button snagged, the blouse slipped halfway off one shoulder, and just as she reached to pull it back up, the door opened. Alexander Hale walked in without warning. Emily froze. He was taller in person than she remembered from the company photos. Dark hair, sharp jawline, tailored black suit that whispered money and power with every line. His eyes, a piercing steel gray, locked onto her instantly, sweeping over the half-undone blouse, the flushed cheeks, the wide eyes. For a moment neither of them moved. Emily's mind raced. This is it, she thought. I am going to be fired on the spot. She yanked the blouse closed with trembling fingers, stammering something that sounded like, I am sorry, I did not think anyone would be here. But her voice came out too small, too breathless. Alexander did not speak immediately. He took a slow step inside, his gaze cool, but not cruel. His presence filled the room effortlessly, a magnetic force that made Emily's knees feel weak even as she backed away toward her desk. She expected anger. She expected cold dismissal. She did not expect him to stop a few feet away and tilt his head slightly, studying her not like a mistake, but like a puzzle. You know, he said softly, his voice smooth as velvet. The city can see you right now? Emily's cheeks burned hotter. She glanced over her shoulder at the vast windows and realized with a sinking heart that the blinds were still up. Anyone in the neighboring skyscrapers could have looked over at that exact moment and seen her fumbling half undressed by the window like a clumsy intern out of her depth. I am so sorry, she repeated quickly, voice shaking. I will leave right away. This was a mistake. Alexander's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, not quite a smirk. Relax, Miss Hart, he murmured. You are not in trouble. That stopped her cold. She blinked, swallowing hard. She had not realized he knew her name. Before she could recover, Alexander moved past her smoothly, walking toward the window. He reached up and, with one decisive pull, lowered the blinds himself. The room softened instantly, the harsh night lights replaced by a dim, private glow. He turned back to face her, hands casually in his pockets. Do you always work this late? He asked. Emily shook her head, still breathless. No, just tomorrow is important. He gave a small nod, eyes still fixed on her. There was no leer in his gaze, no cruel amusement, only curiosity, sharp and focused, like he was seeing something unexpected. Good, he said after a beat. I like people who prepare. With that, Alexander Hale gave her one last glance and walked away, leaving her standing there, blouse half-buttoned, heart racing, wondering what on earth had just happened. Emily Hart had never thought she would work in a place like Hale & Co. The towering skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan had always seemed like a world meant for people who wore designer heels, carried sleek laptops, and had lives as polished as their resumes. Emily was not that girl. She was the intern who spilled coffee on her first day, the one who quietly stayed behind after hours fixing presentations no one thanked her for. She'd grown up in a small Ohio town, raised by her grandmother after her parents' divorce left too many wounds. She had worked 2 part-time jobs in college, juggled scholarships, and lived on ramen noodles just to make it through her business degree. Getting this internship felt like her one big shot. She was determined not to mess it up, but nothing in her carefully crafted plans included standing half undressed in front of the CEO of the company. Alexander Hale was not just any CEO. He was the name on every business magazine, the man rumored to have built an empire before his 35th birthday, the face every executive in the city feared and admired, ruthless, brilliant, private, the kind of man who walked into a room and made everyone else lower their voices. Emily had never expected to meet him in person, let alone like this. She had only seen him from a distance in meetings, the sharp lines of his suit, the way he barely glanced at anyone as he moved through the halls. She had heard the whispers, that he had no family, that his past was off limits, that his heart was locked tighter than the company vault. But none of that explained why, in that moment by the window, he had looked at her not with annoyance or amusement, but with something quieter, curiosity, as if he saw something in her she did not even see in herself. Emily spent the rest of the night lying awake in her tiny apartment, replaying the moment over and over. She thought about his voice, the way it softened when he told her she was not in trouble. She thought about his hands, steady and sure, as he lowered the blinds. She thought about the way he walked away without another word, leaving her breathless and wondering. The next morning, she arrived at the office early, trying to shake off the memory. She threw herself into work, preparing every slide, every note, every document for the presentation. But all through the day, she felt the weight of eyes on her. She caught glimpses of Alexander in passing, in the hallway, in the conference room, in the glass reflections. He did not speak to her again, but she felt his presence, like the air itself shifted slightly whenever he entered the room. Emily told herself it was her imagination. She was just an intern. She was nothing to a man like him. But late that evening, as she gathered her things to leave, a message popped up on her computer. Report to the executive floor. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. No one from her level ever went to the top floor. Only top executives, only those who had earned their place. She almost convinced herself it was a mistake, but something pulled her forward. She stepped into the private elevator, palms damp, heart racing, watching the numbers light up one by one. The doors opened into silence. The executive floor was nothing like the busy chaos below. Here, everything gleamed, glass, steel, quiet lighting. She walked down the corridor, her footsteps too loud in her own ears, until she reached the corner office. Alexander Hale stood by the window, back to her, looking out over the city. For a second, she thought about turning around and leaving, pretending she had never seen the message. But then he spoke, voice low and even. "Miss Hart, come in." Emily stepped inside cautiously, clutching her notebook like a shield. Alexander turned slowly, his expression unreadable. He gestured to the seat across from his desk. She sat, trying not to fidget, trying to steady her breath. "You impressed me today," he said simply. "You work hard, you notice details, you do not ask for attention." Emily blinked, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. He leaned slightly forward, eyes fixed on hers. "Why did you apply here, Miss Hart?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I wanted to prove to myself I could, that I could be more than just small-town Emily." His eyes flickered slightly, as if something in her answer surprised him. For a long moment they sat in silence, the city lights flickering behind him like restless stars. Then, quietly, he said, "I know what it is like to want to prove something." Emily's breath caught. She had not expected that. Before she could gather her thoughts, Alexander rose smoothly to his feet. "That will be all for tonight," he said. "Thank you, Miss Hart." She nodded quickly, gathering her things, heart still racing as she left the office. She could feel his gaze on her as she walked away, the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. Outside the building, the cold night air bit at her skin, but Emily barely noticed. Something had shifted tonight, something she could not name yet. All she knew was that her life had just stepped into unfamiliar territory, and there was no turning back. Long after the other interns and junior staff had gone home, she stared at the glowing computer screen, rereading the same spreadsheet without really seeing it. Her mind kept drifting back to the corner office on the top floor, to Alexander Hale's sharp gaze, to the way his words echoed in her head. She had thought their first encounter by the window was a one-time embarrassment, but it was becoming clear it was something else. Over the following days, Alexander found small but deliberate reasons to call her up. He asked for her input on details that should have been handled by more senior staff, asked for her to stay late, and deliver files he could have had emailed, even once asked her opinion on a design element in a presentation when half a dozen experienced managers were sitting in the room. Emily kept her responses polite, professional, telling herself not to read too much into it, but inside, her heart pounded every time she saw his name flash across her screen or heard his voice down the hall. She was not the kind of girl who got noticed by men like him. She was not glamorous, not polished. She was just a hard-working intern from a small town who still sometimes felt like an imposter among the sleek professionals of Manhattan. And yet, every time Alexander's eyes lingered on her, every time he spoke to her directly, she felt something stirring inside her, something she did not dare name. One evening, after a particularly long day, Emily was gathering her things when she heard his voice behind her. "Miss Hart? A word?" She turned, heart leaping into her throat. He stood there in his usual immaculate black suit, but his tie was loosened slightly, the sharp edges of his perfection softened just enough to make her breath catch. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" She managed, her voice shaking just slightly. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "Come with me." She followed him wordlessly to the private elevator, watching the city lights blur past as they ascended to the top floor. When they stepped into his office, she noticed the room was dimmer than usual, the overhead lights off, the only glow coming from the windows and a single desk lamp. He gestured for her to sit. "Do you enjoy your work here?" he asked without preamble. Emily hesitated, unsure where this was going. "Yes, sir, very much." He gave a small nod, fingers steepled in front of him. "And do you plan to stay?" She blinked. "Stay, sir." After the internship, his gaze sharpened. "Would you want to be here long-term?" Emily's heart raced. She had dreamed of it, of course, but she had never dared imagine the CEO himself would care. I would be honored," she said, softly. Alexander's eyes flickered, just briefly. "Good," he murmured. "I value loyalty." The room fell into a strange, thick silence. Emily could feel the tension crackling between them, a current she didn't know how to navigate. She shifted slightly in her seat, her voice small when she finally spoke. "Is there something you need from me, Mr. Hale?" His eyes held hers, unwavering. "Not tonight, Miss Hart." He rose smoothly to his feet, walking toward the window. His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass, twin shadows against the glittering city beyond. "Thank you for staying late." Emily's breath hitched. "Of course." She stood quickly, gathering her things, desperate to escape before her thoughts betrayed her. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Emily." It was the first time he had used her first name. She turned, breathless. His gaze softened just slightly. "Be careful with the city," he said quietly. "It has sharp edges." Emily nodded, unable to form words, and slipped out into the hall, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own footsteps. Over the next few weeks, the unspoken tension only grew. Emily found herself drawn into Alexander's orbit more and more, called into late-night meetings, asked for insights, included in discussions far above her pay grade. She told herself to focus on work, to keep things professional, but every time his eyes flicked to hers across a room, Every time his voice lowered when they spoke alone, she felt something unraveling inside her. She did not know when exactly she realized she had fallen for him. Maybe it was the night she caught him standing alone in the rain outside the office. No driver, no umbrella, just a man alone with his thoughts. Maybe it was the time he surprised her by asking if she was okay after a rough day, his voice unusually gentle. Or maybe it was just the way he listened, really listened when she spoke, something she had never experienced with anyone else. But along with the growing closeness came the growing weight of secrecy. She knew, instinctively, that this was not something they could name aloud. He was the CEO. She was the intern. There was a line between them no one could cross without consequences. And yet, every glance, every word, every silence between them felt like a step closer to something they could not control. One evening, everything nearly shattered. Emily was leaving the building when she ran into Alexander's cousin, Sebastian Hale, a senior executive who had always made her uneasy. Sebastian smiled coolly, eyes sharp. "Miss Hart," he drawled, "working late again?" Emily forced a polite smile. "Just finishing up, sir." Sebastian's gaze swept over her, lingering a little too long. "I see. You know, my cousin has a reputation for collecting pretty interns. You might want to be careful, dear." Emily's cheeks burned. I do not think that is appropriate, sir." Sebastian's smile widened, sharp and amused. "Oh, I am sure you do not." That night, Emily lay awake, Sebastian's words echoing in her head. She hated how they made her feel, small and foolish, and exposed. She hated that part of her wondered if there was any truth to them. But most of all, she hated the growing ache in her chest when she thought about Alexander, about how much she wanted something she could never ask for. She resolved to pull back, to focus on her work, to remember why she was here, but the heart is not so easily commanded. The next time she saw Alexander, his eyes lingered on her just a second too long, and all her carefully built walls crumbled in an instant. Emily thought she could stay distant. She told herself over and over that she was just an intern and that Alexander Hale's attention meant nothing, that it was just coincidence or professional courtesy or a passing amusement. But the lie unraveled the night she found him in his office long after midnight. The lights dimmed, his tie undone, his head in his hands. She had gone up only to drop off a report, assuming he had left hours ago. But when the elevator doors slid open, there he was, no longer the polished CEO but a man looking for the first time breakable. She hesitated at the doorway, heart pounding. "Mr. Hale?" she asked softly. He looked up and for a second, she saw something raw flicker in his eyes before the mask slid back into place. "Emily," he said, his voice low, rougher than usual. "You should not be here." She stepped inside carefully, closing the door behind her. "Neither should you," she said quietly. He gave a faint, tired smile. "Touché." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the hum of the city outside the windows wrapping around them like a distant song. Then, without thinking, Emily said, "You look like you are carrying the whole world on your back." Alexander let out a soft breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Sometimes it feels like that." He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling. "You know, they all think I have it together, that I am cold, calculated, untouchable." His gaze dropped to hers, something dark and honest in his expression. "But it is not true." Emily's throat tightened. She had never seen him like this, never heard him speak so openly. Slowly, carefully, she crossed the room and sat across from him. "You do not have to be untouchable," she said softly. "Not with me." He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes. Then, quietly, he said, "Do you know why I built this company, Emily?" She shook her head. He exhaled slowly. My father was a brilliant man, but he was reckless. He gambled away everything. Our home, our name, our future. When he died, all we had left was shame and debt. I promised myself I would rebuild from nothing, that no one would ever take anything from me again. His voice dropped. And for a long time, I thought success would fix it, but it doesn't. It just makes the silence louder. Emily's heart ached. She reached out instinctively and placed her hand gently over his. For a moment, he froze. Then slowly, he turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. They sat like that, quiet, steady, two people who had spent years building walls, only to find them crumbling in each other's presence. After that night, something shifted between them. They still maintained the professional facade at work, still kept their distance in public. But in the quiet moments, the moments no one else saw, they let the walls fall away. Emily began staying late, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She brought Alexander coffee when she knew he had skipped dinner. He left her small notes of encouragement when he saw her struggling with a project. Their connection grew not from grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but from the small, quiet ways they began to lean on each other. But not everyone was blind to the change. Sebastian watched with sharp eyes, his amusement turning colder, sharper. One afternoon, he cornered Emily by the elevator, his smile thin. "You are playing a dangerous game, Miss Hart," he murmured. Emily lifted her chin, refusing to let him see her flinch. "I am not playing anything, sir," Sebastian chuckled softly. "Oh, my dear, you are so naive. Do you think men like Alexander fall for girls like you? Do you think he will choose you over his empire?" Emily clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. "With all due respect, sir, that is none of your business." Sebastian's smile twisted. "Oh, but it is. You see, people like me have spent years protecting this company, making sure distractions do not derail what we have built. And you, Miss Hart, are a distraction." His words sliced deep, leaving her shaken long after he walked away. That night, as she sat in her apartment, Sebastian's voice echoed in her mind. She thought about everything she had worked for, everything she stood to lose, and she wondered, for the first time, if maybe she had been a fool to believe this could be anything more than a beautiful, fleeting dream. Emily did not sleep that night. She lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of her apartment, Sebastian's words circling in her head like a poison she could not spit out. "You are a distraction. You are not the kind of girl men like Alexander choose." She wanted to believe that none of it mattered, that the connection she and Alexander had built was real, was strong enough to survive the weight of status and money and expectation. But the doubts had already sunk their claws into her heart. The next morning, she walked into the office with a tight smile and tired eyes, determined to push everything down, to bury the ache beneath professionalism. Alexander called her into his office just before noon. She stepped inside, shoulders stiff, heart racing. He was standing by the window, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he said quietly, "we need to talk." She braced herself, preparing for the worst, but instead of the cold dismissal she feared, he turned and said something she never expected. "Sebastian spoke to me." Her breath hitched. "He said you're pulling away, that you're doubting this, doubting us." Emily's voice cracked. I don't know what we are." Alexander stepped closer, his gaze soft but steady. "I know what we are. I know what I want. And it's not the company, not the board, not the power. It's you." Emily's heart squeezed painfully. She shook her head, tears burning in her eyes. "You don't understand. You live in a world I can't touch. I'll always be the girl they whisper about, the intern who wasn't supposed to matter. And you'll always be untouchable." Alexander reached out, cupping her face gently in his hands. "I don't want to be untouchable anymore," he said softly. "Not with you." For a long moment, they just stood there, breathing the same air, feeling the same trembling hope. Then quietly, Emily whispered, "I'm scared." Alexander smiled faintly. "So am I." That night, they left the office together for the first time, walking side by side through the city as if no one was watching. They went nowhere special, just wandered the streets like two people learning how to exist outside their carefully built roles. They bought street food, sat on a bench overlooking the river, talked about everything and nothing, and for the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. But life, as always, had other plans. 2 days later, a scandal erupted. A leaked photo, a half-truth spun into headlines. Emily's name plastered across gossip blogs, painted as the intern who seduced the CEO, the naive girl who clawed her way into power with nothing but charm and ambition. Alexander's advisors panicked, his board raised concerns, his investors demanded explanations. For a moment, it felt like everything they had built was crumbling. Emily wanted to run. She packed her bag late one night, heart pounding, ready to disappear before she became the thing that destroyed him. But when she stepped out into the hall, Alexander was already there, leaning against the doorframe, his eyes tired but fierce. "Where are you going?" he asked quietly. Emily's voice shook. "I'm protecting you." Alexander stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Don't you understand by now?" he murmured. "You are not what's breaking me. You're the only thing holding me together." Emily's resolve crumbled. She let herself fall into his arms, burying her face in his chest as the weight of fear and love and longing crashed over her. That night, they faced the storm together. Alexander called an emergency meeting, stood before his board, and spoke the truth without apology. "I will not sacrifice someone I care about to protect appearances," he said calmly. "If you believe I'm weaker for loving her, then you never understood what made me strong in the first place." Emily watched from the doorway, heart in her throat, as Alexander dismantled every whisper, every doubt, with the sheer force of his conviction. And when it was over, when the board finally fell silent, he turned to her with a smile that said, "We survived." For a while, Emily thought they had weathered the worst of it. She thought that after the board accepted Alexander's stand, after the public lost interest in the headlines, they would settle into something steady, something strong. But she underestimated how deeply power runs its roots and how hard the world pushes back against things it cannot control. It was not the press, or the board, or even Sebastian who caused the rift. It was Alexander's mother. She arrived at the office one afternoon without warning, tall and elegant, wrapped in expensive silk and cold authority. Emily had seen her photo before, in articles, on magazine covers, but no photo had prepared her for the piercing weight of the woman's gaze. She summoned Emily to a private lounge, her smile thin and sharp. "You are very pretty," she said calmly, looking Emily up and down. "But pretty girls are a dime a dozen in this city." Emily felt her cheeks flush. She opened her mouth to speak, but the woman raised a hand, silencing her. "My son is not a man who can afford distractions. He has built an empire from ashes, clawed his way to the top through blood and precision. Do you think he can afford to throw it away for love?" The word dripped like poison. Emily's throat tightened painfully. "I don't want anything from him," she whispered. "I love him." The woman's smile sharpened. "And that is precisely why you are dangerous." That night, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, heart heavy, mind racing. She thought about Alexander, about his dreams, his burdens, his relentless climb. She thought about how hard he had fought to stand where he stood, and she thought about how easily she could become the thing that made him fall. So she made a choice. She left. No dramatic fight, no tearful goodbye, just a quiet note slipped under his door. I love you too much to be the reason you lose yourself. For days, Alexander searched for her. He called, he sent messages, he even showed up at her old apartment. But Emily was gone. She had slipped away into the city, disappearing into the noise and shadows, trying to rebuild the pieces of herself she had almost forgotten. She took small jobs, rented a tiny room in a crumbling building, avoided headlines and gossip. She tried to remind herself who she was before him, before all of it. But every night she felt his absence like a missing limb. Meanwhile, Alexander fell into silence. He worked, he fought, he conquered, but his heart was no longer in it. His mother, seeing his emptiness, tried to comfort him, but Alexander only looked at her with eyes that had grown colder, sharper. "You think you saved me," he said quietly one evening, "but you were the one who broke the only thing that made me feel alive." Months passed. Emily kept her head down, focused on surviving. She told herself she had done the right thing, that Alexander was better off without her. But the ache in her chest never dulled. And then, one day, she received a package. No name, no return address, just a small envelope with a note inside. "I'm done pretending I can live without you. Meet me where it all began." Her hands trembled as she read the words over and over. She knew exactly where to go. Emily arrived at the office building just as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting the glass towers in shades of gold and crimson. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the elevator, memories flooding her mind with every floor she passed. She remembered the first day she met Alexander, the mistakes, the glances, the moments when everything between them shifted from accidental to undeniable. When the doors opened, she stepped onto the top floor, her breath catching as she saw him standing by the window, just as he had so many times before. Alexander turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers, and for a moment neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. Then quietly he crossed the room, stopping just close enough for her to feel his warmth. "I tried to let you go," he murmured, voice rough. "I thought it was the right thing, but every day without you felt like losing a piece of myself." Emily swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. "I left because I thought I was saving you. I thought you would be freer without me." Alexander reached out, cupping her face gently in his hands. "You never weighed me down, Emily. You were the only thing that made all of this feel like it mattered." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, feeling the truth of his words settle deep into her chest. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But I'd rather be scared with you than empty without you." They stood there, breathing the same air, hearts pounding in quiet sync. And in that moment, Emily understood that love was not about perfection, not about smooth paths or easy answers. It was about choosing, again and again, even when it hurt, even when it was hard. She opened her eyes, her voice steady despite the tears. "Then let's stop running." Alexander nodded slowly. No more running. That night, they walked through the city together, not as CEO and intern, not as billionaire and nobody, but simply as two people who had found something rare, something worth holding on to. They did not need grand declarations or promises. They only needed the quiet truth between them, that love, real love, survives, not because it is easy, but because it is chosen. As they stood on the balcony overlooking the glowing city, Emily rested her head against Alexander's shoulder, feeling his arm wrap around her with a softness that spoke louder than any words. She smiled faintly, whispering, I never thought I'd belong in this world." Alexander kissed the top of her head, his voice low and certain. "You weren't meant to belong to the world, Emily. You were meant to belong with me." And in that quiet, in that fragile, perfect moment, They both understood that the most powerful kind of love is not the one that sweeps you away. It is the one that teaches you how to stand, even when the world tries to break you.